I'm getting ready to reload 357 Magnum on a Lee Classic turret press. I've got the press itself clamped onto my very sturdy workbench. I'm going to take you through my process for reloading 357 Magnum on the Lee Classic turret press, including how I set up the press and all the equipment I use, and then the whole process of reloading 357 Magnum. You can see here that I have the press itself bolted onto a 2x6. And then I use C-clamps to attach the 2x6 to the workbench. I've done this just to avoid drilling holes, honestly, in my workbench, but that's how I've got the press itself attached to my workbench. The first step for me for reloading 357 Magnum is to clean the brass. I use this case tumbler, and for the medium inside the tumbler, I use ground walnut shell. And this ground walnut shell bedding I get at pet stores. So it's like a 10-pound bag at a great price at a pet store. So really a good tip there. I run the tumbler with my brass in it for about anywhere from 2 to 3 hours. And I'll include a short video clip here of the tumbler in action. Here's all the equipment I will install on the press for reloading 357 Magnum. The turret and dies. There's 4 dies attached to this turret. The turret goes into the press. It's important to know this. There's a one-time setup to get these dies set up for the cartridge reloading, and I'll do a separate video on doing the setup for the dies. And when I show the reloading process later in the video, we'll talk about the function and purpose of each of these dies as we're going through the reloading process. The turret system is great for me for 2 reasons. You set up the dies one time, and then they're attached to the turret. So when I'm ready to reload 357 Magnum, I just grab this set of dies with the turret, plug it into the press, and I'm reloading 357 Magnum. When it's time to reload 44 Magnum, I take this turret and dies out, and I put in a different set of dies that's already set up on the turret. So it's a simple swap out of a turret to switch between reloading different calibers. Also need to install this primer arm. The primer arm is what attaches to the press, and there's 2 different primer arms. One to hold small primers, which this one is because I'm reloading 357 Magnum with small Magnum primers, pistol primers. And then there's another arm that will hold large primers. Also, we need a shell holder. There's different size shell holders depending upon the size of the brass. This is a number 1 shell holder, and it fits the 357 Magnum. So we'll install that on the press. We have the Lee Auto Drum powder measure, something else that I need to get installed on the press. I find this system to be great for two reasons. This is the drum right here. Dial it in one time setup for a particular powder and charge, and then it's good to go. Second reason, I can easily swap this drum out. So this drum comes out, just unscrew it on the back, and I can pop a new one in. So when I'm reloading 44 Magnum, I'll pop in the drum that I've dialed in for 44 Magnum. When I'm reloading 357 Magnum, I pop in that drum, and so on. I've already dialed in the charge on the drums, but I'll show when I'm reloading the process of how you adjust the charge. This cylinder right here just turns, and it allows you to dial things in very exactingly. But I'll demonstrate that when we're actually doing the reloading. Also have the Lee Safety Prime system. Comes in two sizes. There's a SM for small, S on the front for small. There's also a large. We're going to be working with small primers for the 357 Magnum. So this is the one we're using. In fact, let's actually get the primers in the case here to be set up for putting it on the press. So with this Lee Safety Prime system, we have a little lever right here. We'll pull that down to the open position. Allows us to open this up. I've got my Magnum small pistol primers, CCI number 550s, which I want for reloading. My 357 Magnums. Let me carefully take these out. Slide this sleeve off. Try not to spill any of these things. And then I'm going to flip this over. Slide it to the edge. So that I've got my primers in place, and I'm just going to flip it over. Which drops all the primers into place. And then we'll do the shaky shake, which hopefully turns over all the primers so that they're face up. And any that didn't get there, just one I see, flip it over manually. Okay, and I'm just gonna triple check here that I see it 100% of them are turned over correctly. And then I'm going to close the lid and put it into the on locked position. So a tip here, now I'm gonna run these primers down, and you can see they're in the arm here. Important tip, like if you were thinking, yeah, I'm gonna empty these primers out for whatever reason, you have to flip it over and get all the primers out of that arm so that this lever can go up, go to the open position. If there's primers down in here, it won't go into the open position. So be aware of that little tip. All right. So I'm set to go. Primers are in the Lee Safety Prime system. So that's the equipment that goes on the press. Before I demonstrate putting it on the press for reloading, let's talk about some additional equipment I use for reloading. Scales. So I love these electronic scales. I switched to them a few years ago. I used to use a beam scale. I've actually got two of them. One is a backup. Love the digital scales. They're available online at a really good price. They're called millimeter scales or jewelry scales. Just have to make sure they can weigh in grains, but they're accurate, and the ones that you can get that measure in grains can measure to the hundredth of a grain, which is what you want. Along with the scales, I've also got scale test weights. This brand is, I believe it's pronounced Trominer, and it's a set of test weights in grains, so I can validate my scales every time that I use them, or each time I set them up to be reloading. I'll verify them with these test weights to make sure that they're functioning accurately. Okay, one other piece of equipment that's really important, a caliper. So just being able to measure accurately to, well, the thousandths of an inch for our overall length of cartridge, case length, etc. Calipers, very important. Also, another piece of equipment that's important are safety glasses, since, working with those primers, jamming them into the primer pocket, safety glasses, just to be really safe. And also, another piece of equipment here, the cartridge boxes. So as I'm finishing loading a cartridge, I can pop it in a box. So super important is a recipe for the 357 Magnum reloading that I'm going to do. And I took this recipe from the Lyman Manual, 49th edition. And it's critical to have a legit, valid recipe. You build up your load with a start load and build up to the charge that you are comfortable with and happy with for your reloading process and your purpose. So I use this recipe to verify that I've got all the correct components as I'm setting up my bench for reloading. I verify I have the correct powder measure drum installed on the powder measure. I verify my powder charge as I load each cartridge. So the recipe, having it on a separate piece of paper versus thumbing through a manual is super handy to me. So that's just gives you a snapshot of my recipe and the details I've captured there for quick reference to make sure everything is very, very accurate and verified. So let's get my components all lined up from my recipe. I know that I'm using IMR 4227 smokeless powder. I know that I'm using the Hornady XTP in 158 grains. It's a 38 caliber, 0.357 diameter. That checks with my recipe, perfect. I also know that I want to be using CCI Magnum small pistol primers, which I've already put into the Lee Safety Prime. So check there. And then last but not least, the brass that I'm reloading with, and want to be 100% sure every case is 357 Magnum. I manage that as I'm shooting, by shooting and capturing them in a safe place, knowing that this lot P57 Magnum brass is what I'm reloading and how many times I've reloaded it. This is 100 shells, and I've reloaded it. This will be the 7th time I'm reloading it. So there's the components. Okay, I'm going to clear everything out of the way, and then we'll work on setting up this press. Time to get things installed on the press. We'll start with the two simplest things. The primer arm and the shell holder. Primer arm first, necessary to go on first. I'm just going to run the ram up by moving the handle down. I'm going to drop in the primer arm just like that. Looks good. Shell holder snaps on to the top of the ram. This little toe fits into a slot. Push it on. Shell holder's in place. So you can see these two things. The reason the primer arm has to go on first is, well, the shell holder is kind of holding it in. So that's a close-up of that. Next up, let's get the turret and dies installed on the top of our press right here. Before we do that, though, there's a very important first step. We need to run the ram up by pushing the handle down. So here the ram's going up because I'm pushing the handle down. And we have this indexing rod here with a plastic square ratchet on it. This fits in, the plastic square ratchet fits into the bottom of the turret. I'll show you that in a second. So with the ram up, meaning the handle's down, the indexing rod and that little square ratchet is free spinning, which is what we want, because when we put this metal turret on there, we want that plastic piece free spinning so that it'll kind of fit in there without causing any breakage. These little square ratchets are only less than $1. I've never broken one, thankfully, but I don't want to start, and this is how we avoid it. So that's a key tip. All right, let's go ahead and get that turret put in place. So the turret goes on to the top here. A couple of things to be thinking about. We've got a ram up, so I want to line things up. I don't want to have my depriming die facing the ram. I'd like to orient that away because I'm going to put the turret in place and then turn it. And I'm also going to try to make sure that I've lined up that square ratchet piece by turning it gently as the turret drops in. And then I'll just run a couple of test cycles here, making sure it indexes nicely. Very good, got our turret in place. It's worth mentioning, I'm going to run the ram up. I'm going to take the turret out by twisting it. Actually, let's make sure we've got, do that again. Get the primer die away from the ram, important. Okay, running the ram back up, primer die is not over the ram. Now I'm going to twist and lift to take the turret and dies off. I'm doing this to show you that we can just take this indexing rod out altogether, put our turret and dies on here, Again, making sure that my depriming die is not over the ram. And now, when we operate the ram, it's not going to index our turret, but we can index it manually. One click at a time. So that's another option, and why is that useful? Some people prefer this, I guess. But also, let's just say you did manage to break the square ratchet. You have a way to operate without it. So that's just a quick tip. Next up, let's get our auto drum powder measure installed on the press. So it gets installed on the expander die, the powder through expander die. Okay, right here. I also have a riser on here. It's just a cylinder that rises our powder measure up above the other dies and gives us some clearance for things. So that's a good tip to know, that you probably want to have that riser. It's just a piece that screws into the die that our powder measure screws into. So you can see we're threaded down here. So this literally is I'm just gonna be threading that onto the riser, which is threaded into the expander powder through die. So I'm gonna go ahead and thread that on there. By the way, our powder hopper just comes off. I can set that aside for now, makes it easier. So I'm just threading that on. Just until it's snug. I'm good with that. Now here's a key tip. This arm right here, we want it, so I got lucky. I threaded this on, and it's not sticking out this way out over the edge of our turret's circumference. If it were sticking out here, it would be in the way of our priming system. It would bump into it, which we don't want. So I want you to be aware that there's an easy adjustment right in here. That knurled little nut or knob allows us to loosen the body of the priming system so that we can be snug on the die, loosen it up a little bit so that we can shift and move this arm so that it's centered over the top of the dies and won't be then causing a collision with the priming system. Let's get our hopper up there. The hopper is pretty simple, little plastic container here. It's got a lid on it, pour the powder in the top. It does have an open and closed position, so that powder can be poured in while it's closed and it won't come out. And of course, when we're operating, we'll set it to open. So I'm gonna set it to close because I'm gonna put powder in. Let me grab my powder. Double checking my recipe, double checking everything. I've got the IMR 4227 smokeless powder, yes. I'm gonna just pour it in my hopper. I like to run it pretty full as a tip for getting good pulls on your powder every time. One of the tips is, fill your hopper. You can see that hopper's mostly full. In fact, I'm going to open another can and top it off. And then filled up the hopper with powder. Kind of important, I think, for throwing accurate charges is just maintaining a full hopper. So that's filled up. I've got my two scales out, my two electronic scales out, because we're going to verify that our powder measure is throwing accurate charges. And to do that, we'll weigh like 10 charges to make sure everything looks good. I've also got my test weights out here because I need to verify these scales are accurate, at least accurate enough for the job that we're doing. So I've just turned these on. It takes time to warm up, they say. I honestly haven't found that it changes much. I'm not in a cold environment. I'm in my house. It's 70 degrees in here. But as they warm up, maybe they become a tiny bit more accurate. Who knows? I'm going to take a 5-grain test weight, throw it on the scale. Comes out at 4.98. I think you can read that. Yep, I can see that in the camera. Let's check this other scale. This one says 4.96. I'm reloading to an accuracy in the tenths of a grain, not hundredths of a grain. So when I see a discrepancy of 2/100ths, I'm not at all worried about that. There's a 4-grainer coming in exactly at 4 grains on this scale. 4-grainer coming in at 4.02 on this scale. Again, hundredths of a grain is a tiny, tiny measure of weight. In fact, the tolerance of these scales is to 2/100ths of a grain. These test weights are not certified. Certified test weights are horribly expensive. Like I've seen them for $1,000-something. I got this for $40, and it gives me the confidence that I am verifying that my scales are in an acceptable level of accuracy. And I do this every time I'm reloading. Every time I turn these scales on to be reloading, I'm testing it out. 10.04, so this is a 10-grain test weight, and accurate. The scale says it's 10.04, as is this one. The tolerance could be 2/100ths on the scale and 2/100ths on the test weight. I'm very satisfied that both of my scales are weighing accurately for the job I'm doing here. Let's throw some powder charges and weigh them to make sure the powder measure is throwing accurate charges now. All right, let's test our powder measure, see if it's throwing accurate charges. Just have a case here. I'm going to actually go through the process of charging this case over and over again and weighing the charge itself. To accomplish this, one thing I've done is I have turned the hopper from a closed position to an on position. So I'm just twisting it to an on position. And I've even labeled on my powder measure closed and on because it wasn't labeled. And so it's open, powder's dumping into my powder measure. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my piece of brass and get these scales turned back on. And I'm going to what's called tear out the brass, pushing the tear button. So now with the brass on there, the scale is measuring at 0 grains, which allows me to put powder into the brass and weigh just the powder. So tear that scale out. Let me tear this one out. Same process. Push that tear button with the brass on there. Okay. So I've got both scales teared out. Now I'm going to go through the process of charging this case and weighing the powder to see where my powder measure's at. Time to time, even though I've dialed this barrel in, the powder barrel in many times and reloaded many times with it, humidity in the air, the rhythm I have on the turrets, how hard I'm throwing the handle, it affects how much powder's thrown. And so I check it every time before I do any reloading. So we're 15.44. I'm looking for a range from my recipe of 15.5 to 15.8. And so I can adjust if I need to. So I'm going to get a rhythm going here as best I can, simulating reloading. Throw the handle a certain way, just, not too hard, not too soft. And 15.44 again, 15.44. Still under the 15.5 I want. Cycle turret. And throw the handle, maybe a little harder that time. 15.44, 15.5. Nope, 4.8. All right, so I'm saying I'm a smidge light. Honestly, I'll do this probably 10 times after I make this adjustment, but it's kind of nice that it's a little light because I want to show you the adjustment here. Got this little key. Oops, we can use that key to adjust the powder drum. So this key just fits into this screw. Screwing it in, here's the drum that the powder is dropping into. Screwing it in, you can see that it would reduce the amount of powder. Screwing it out would increase the amount. It's a fine adjustment. I'm going to move this a little bit out, but not too much, to see if I can get 15.5 to 15.8. All right, so that's how the adjustment's made. Pretty straightforward. Okay. Cycle this around a few more times. I could just sit here and charge and not cycle it. Charge and not cycle it and weigh it. The reason I don't do that, this action of the turret going round and round and the throw of the charging handle, it affects how much powder's dropped. I guess something else I want to point out that's important. If you see this going around, there's a wobble to it. I mean, the whole measure wobbles, the hopper wobbles, and when I first got it years ago, I thought I must have installed this incorrectly. This seems like it's not quite right. But believe me, it's actually works this way, and that wobble is just a part of it. And who knows, it might be what helps allow the powder to drop in just the right way. All right, charge this and weigh it. 15.6, 15.58. So that's within my range of 15.5 to 15.8. I'm only measuring an accuracy of tenths. So I probably shouldn't even out loud say the hundredth measurement, but just for full disclosure, I'm going to say it. 15.6, 15.62. So 2 in a row that are within my range of 15.5 to 15.8. Let's do a few more. $15.64, 15.62. I'll tweak it up a hair. Just another fine adjustment there. I'm already within the range, but I'm not, I mean, if I could be right in the middle of it, I'd be probably thrilled, right? So, another fine adjustment, 15.64, 15.64. One more time. .66, 15.64. All right. I can adjust, obviously, as I'm reloading, but I like to dial it in now to where I don't have to, as I'm reloading, to have to dump and redo. Because I'm going to measure, you'll see when we reload, I'm going to weigh every charge to make sure I'm in the range. If I feel like I'm, consistently too low, I'll fine tune then. But that's the process of making sure our powder measure is throwing charges we like before we begin the reloading process. As a final verification, I ran 10 more charges through the powder measure, weighed them on both scales. Column on the left is for the left-hand scale, column on the right, right-hand scale. I didn't have any charges that were too heavy, had one that was light circled in red there. I'm happy with the setup. Let's get the Lee safety prime system attached to the press. When you buy the Lee safety prime system, it comes with this plastic arm. You bolt it on to the press. There's this tab right here that just slips on. Kind of like attaching two pieces of Lego. So it just slips on like that. That's how easy it is to get the Lee Safety Prime system set up on the press. Let's talk about trimming brass. The recipe calls for trim to length 1.280 for my recipe for 357 Magnum. Here's my caliper. This piece of brass is at 1.280. This brass has been reloaded 6 times, never been trimmed. It's the correct length. I do check the cartridges to see that they're at the correct trim length, but I've never had to trim any. And I learned from the Modern Reloading 2nd edition Richard Lee manual on page, let me see what page that was, page 54 regarding case trimming. For pistols, revolvers, you may not need to trim your brass because it may not be stretching as it's shot. I don't go anywhere near maximum loads, and I stop reloading after 8 reloads. So that's probably why I've never gotten to a point where I've ever needed to trim the brass. So I wanted to share that tip. Everything's set up, ready to go. Let's look at doing some reloading. Let's get in close at reloading 357 Magnum on the Lee Classic turret press and talk about the process. Got a piece of brass with a spent primer on it. Putting that in the shell holder. Shell holder is what, holds that shell in place. Got my first die here. This first die is the sizing depriming die. So we're going to knock that primer out and we're going to shell size the brass perfectly. So here's the handle. Going to run the handle down, which brings the ram up, pushes that up into the die, sized it, deprimed it. We're now in a position to use our priming system, the Lee Safety Prime. It's got a thumb tab here. I'm going to push forward on this and it's going to drop a primer into this little cup right here. So let's get in close on that. You see that cup's got no primer in it. Putting my thumb here, pushing forward. I've now got a primer in the little cup on the priming arm. Now we're going to cycle the press. I guess I should point out every cycle of the press, arm down and up, this turret moves, which just moves our dies into place over the ram. So now I'm going to cycle the arm up, which brings the ram down, and we can see this is starting to happen. The primer on this arm is going to get pushed up under the brass there, as it just did. Now I need to do a press forward, so I'm going to back up a smidge. A press forward on this handle. I kind of hold the back of the press as I do this. The press forward on the handle is what's going to push that primer in the primer pocket. So here's the press forward. And there we go. We've got a primer, new primer in the primer pocket. I'm now going to inspect this, make sure that primer looks like it's seated flush, checking that my brass looks fine after being sized. Next step, I need to get ready to weigh the powder charge. To do that, I'm going to take my brass over to my scale. Normally the scale would be on because it would be a lot faster if I wasn't videoing. I'm going to put the brass on the scale. Don't really care what it weighs. I'm tearing that out, so I'm pushing the button, the tear button. So now the scale thinks that we're at 0 with the brass on there. Good. That'll allow me to weigh the powder charge. So we're now lined up over our, our powder die. It's actually the expanding powder through die. And so something important to know. The expanding of the case is what allows a bullet to go into the case. And before it's been sized, hasn't been expanded, I really can't, it's balanced on there, but there's no way it's going into that case. The expanding die will expand this mouth just a smidge to allow this to be set on top there to be seated. So that's what the expander die does. The powder through portion of it is the powder's dumped into the case. So into the shell holder we go. Again, lever down, ram up, pushes it up into the die. That gave me the expansion on the case mouth. It also drops the powder in. Now I'm taking this case over right away to my over to my scale. I need to have a range of 15.5 to 15.8. I'm exactly 15.5, so I'm happy with this charge. Taking the case back to the press. Back into the shell holder it goes. Now remember, the last step was to expand and drop the charge. The expanding is what allows the bullet to get, placed on top here and sit there nicely so that it can be pushed in. I will point out, you can get a weird angle on this thing, and I'll try to do that. So you can see that's a little cockeyed. I can even do it more, I guess. Kind of fun, actually. So that's really cockeyed on there. Watch, the die allows it, maybe a little too cockeyed. A little cockeyed is not a big deal. When you push that up in there, it straightens things out and seats that bullet nicely. So now you can see the bullet is seated in there beautifully. Going to cycle the press, turning the turret. And we can see we've got our bullet seated in there. Next step is to crimp the case mouth into the cannula of the bullet. Let me explain that a little more clearly here. You can see this bullet, there's a groove in it here, right? This groove. That's the cannula. We want the brass to be crimped into that cannula. Holds the bullet in place for Magnums and other cartridges that have cannulas. So I'm now over the die that's going to do the crimp. I'm going to go handle down, ram up, pushing it into the die, crimping the brass into the bullet. And there we have a completed cartridge. Final inspection. Everything looks great. Into the case box it goes. Let's talk about cartridge overall length, which is the overall length of the cartridge. And I can see this is 1.59, which is what my recipe calls for. Overall length, 1.59. This is determined by the seating of the bullet, which is happening now at this stage in my press. Bullet seated, and that determined the overall length. Crimping also might affect it, so we've seated and now crimped. Going to measure this cartridge. Want it to be 1.59. And it is. Now, because these dies are set up, I don't need to check every single one, but I do check periodically, every 50 or so, just make sure my dies are not adjusting somehow. I wouldn't expect that. They're dialed in on top of the turret. They're bolted down snugly. So, there's the bullet seating die. That nut on top is what tightens it down so that it's not going to get loose. And so, just wanted to share cartridge overall length and what it means and how it's accomplished. All right, let's run through the process without too much details. Brass goes into the shell holder, running it up into the sizing depriming die, putting a primer into the primer arm, pressing forward to seat that primer into the primer pocket, putting my brass on the scale, tearing it out, running the brass into the expander powder through die, which charged the case with powder, weighing the powder charge, confirming it's correct, putting a bullet on top of the brass to run it up into the bullet seating die, and then running it up into the crimping die. Final inspection, everything looks good. I really enjoy the Lee Classic Turret Press, and the addition of the safety prime system makes getting primers seated into the primer pocket so easy. Just a natural part of building out the cartridge. Also, the addition of that Lee auto drum powder measure makes charging the case so easy, and again, a natural step in the flow of building out a cartridge. About to seat the bullet on the seating die, I do not crimp on the seating die. So after the bullet's seated, The fourth die on my turret is the Lee factory crimp die, and I really appreciate how great that crimp is and how easy it is to work with. I would usually be sitting down as I'm running the press. Didn't want the chair to be in the way of the video. Can get into a nice rhythm and be cranking out cartridges. This is a really enjoyable hobby, I think, reloading 357 Magnum can definitely save money. I'll include at the end of the video how I see the cost savings working out. All right, I'll wrap up this last cartridge here, and we'll explore some other interesting topics related to reloading 357 Magnum. Can you save money reloading 357 Magnum on a Lee Classic turret press? Or any press for that matter? Yes, absolutely. Big assumption, you own the press, the dies, the equipment for doing the reloading. So if you own all the equipment already, you made that investment because you enjoy the hobby, then starting with just the cost of components, and I even went out at today's prices in April of 2025 and shopped what it would cost to get powder, brass, bullets, and primers, brand new, and calculated that I could produce a cartridge of 357 Magnum, Hornady XTP, 158 grain, 357 Magnum for 56 cents per round. I also went out and looked at what it would cost to buy factory new ammo, Hornady XTP, 158 grain bullets. And it came out to $1.52 per round. That's a savings of 96 cents per round. What assumptions do I have here? Assumptions are I bought all of these things in a local store. Hazmat fees are quite expensive if you're shipping powder and primers. So I don't want to be buying these online. If I can avoid it, it would definitely increase my costs. Another thing, I'm reloading with a fairly expensive bullet. These Hornady XTP bullets are they're not just a round nose full metal jacket, right? These are high premium bullets. So I could probably even save more money if I found a reload that I liked in a different bullet. So the reality for me, 100%, yes, big savings once you own all the equipment. So I thoroughly enjoy going out to the range and shooting my reloads. I enjoy the hobby of reloading, and I much appreciate the fact that I'm saving money every time I create a single cartridge. I mean, that one cartridge I reloaded, I saved 96 cents the way I look at it. There we go. That's my perspective on saving money reloading 357 Magnum.